Module 4, the negative list, what is excluded. Most of the common principles tells you what qualifies. One short passage on page 3 tells you what cannot, whatever else is true about it. That passage overrides the tables, so read it before you spend time matching activities. The heading is Exclusion of Activities in Support of Upstream and Midstream Activities in the Fossil Fuel Industry, Electricity Generation from Coal or Peat, and those that lead to deforestation. Take the 3 parts in turn. Upstream activities, the document says, involve exploration or production of fossil fuels. That is the extraction end. Midstream activities include natural gas processing, storage, transport, liquefaction and regasification, and crude oil refining. That is everything between the well and the point of use: pipelines, terminals, liquefaction plants, refineries. Then the sentence that catches consultants out. Activities that are otherwise eligible but support these activities are not eligible. Read that again because it is the operative rule. An activity can sit squarely in the positive list, satisfy every criterion in its row, and still be excluded because of what it serves. The document gives its own example, and it is a good one. Carbon capture and utilization for enhanced oil recovery. Carbon capture is an eligible activity in the cross-sectoral table. But when the captured carbon dioxide is used to push more oil out of a reservoir, the activity supports upstream fossil fuel production, and it is not eligible. So eligibility is not decided by the row alone. You have to ask what the activity serves. There are exactly 2 exceptions to the fossil fuel exclusion, and the document names both: the use of waste gas and the reduction of fugitive emissions from existing gas infrastructure. Those 2 exist because both reduce emissions from infrastructure that already exists without extending or enabling extraction. Note the word existing in the second. It is doing work. The second exclusion is electricity generation from coal or peat, stated plainly, with no threshold and no efficiency test that rescues it. Elsewhere, the document confirms that mines currently producing coal are ineligible. The third exclusion covers deforestation. Activities that lead directly, or where feasible to assess indirectly, to deforestation over time are ineligible, other than small-scale tree clearance. 2 phrases in that sentence matter on a live assignment. Indirectly, where feasible to assess, means you are expected to look beyond the immediate site if assessment is practicable, and over time means the test is not limited to what happens during construction. Beyond that passage, individual rows carry their own exclusions, and they are easy to miss because they sit inside criteria you might skim. First-generation liquid biofuels shall be excluded, unless sourced from waste or from biomass meeting specified criteria, demonstrated through internationally accepted sustainability certification, and not interfering with food security. Policy operations that largely support activities not eligible under the common principles are themselves not eligible. So a reform program cannot be counted merely because it contains a climate-related action if the bulk of what it supports is ineligible. Now a distinction the document draws explicitly, because getting it wrong changes which criteria you apply. Greenfield activities, in the document's definition, are projects in new sites or in existing facilities where the vast majority of plant and equipment is new, and, in the case of existing facilities, all the critical items of equipment are decommissioned. It also covers projects that primarily acquire and deploy new appliances or equipment. Brownfield activities are projects that modify existing facilities, equipment, appliances, systems, or processes, and where a whole facility dedicated to the same activity is gradually replaced or retrofitted over a longer period, that may be treated as a series of brownfield projects. The common principles distinguish these 2 where eligibility and criteria differ, and several tables carry separate rows for each. Table 6 alone has greenfield water, greenfield projects, brownfield energy, and brownfield projects as distinct entries. Picking the wrong one means testing your activity against the wrong criteria and reaching an answer that cannot be defended. The document is explicit about why greenfield criteria exist at all. To help prevent a long-term lock-in of high greenhouse gas emission infrastructure and activities. Which brings us to lock-in, the disqualifier that runs through the whole document. It appears in the eligibility principles for transitional activities and again for enabling activities, in the same words. Do not lead to a lock-in of emission-intensive assets that is inconsistent with the long-term goal of net zero emissions. The background section makes the reasoning plain. Updating the principles involved avoiding identifying as climate mitigation finance those activities that, despite reducing emissions in the short term, risk locking in emissive technologies over long periods and run counter to the structural changes needed. So an activity that cuts emissions today can still fail. Short-term reduction is not the test. Consistency with a net zero trajectory is. Finally, one boundary that prevents a serious misreading of everything above. Committing to the common principles, the document says, does not exclude the financing of activities that are not compliant with their criteria. The common principles are a tracking and reporting methodology. They are not a lending policy, an exclusion list for investment, or a judgment about whether a project should proceed. A bank may finance an excluded activity for entirely sound reasons. It simply does not report that finance as climate mitigation finance. For you, this means a 0 in the climate column is a factual reporting outcome, not a criticism of the project, and saying so clearly to a client who is disappointed by the number is part of the job. Record every exclusion you apply with the same care as an inclusion. A row marked excluded, with the reason and the source, is evidence that you screened the component. A component that simply never appears looks like an oversight, and a reviewer cannot tell the difference. Module 5 turns to adaptation, where there is no list at all.